Dame i gospodo, dobrodošli nazad. Nadam se da ste se malo odmorili, uhvatili kratak predah, malo ispričali, popili kafu. Vi ovdje u Beogradu imate stvarno sjajnu kafu, pogotovo po ovim vašim kafanama i kafanicama, ali ih imate previše, čovječe, kafane i kafanici na svakom ćošku ovdje u Beogradu. Mi ih u cijelom Skoplju imamo samo 3 i u njih izlazimo kad dođu gosti iz Srbije da nam plate piće. Ima i onako objava, stoji petak, 20 časova, gostuju iz Srbije. Svi u kafanu idemo. Ali dobro, mi ne gajimo tu strast prema kafanama kao vi. Vi to smatrate za nešto više od hobija, to je ozbiljna praksa u pitanju. Vi ostanete na dodatnoj nastavi do 5 ujutru ako treba. To je valjda tako kad se nešto voli. Sada će na temu dodatne prakse govoriti naš sljedeći predavač koji smo pripremili za vas, verovatno iz mnogo drugačijeg ugla nego što sam ja sad ovo objasnio. Na temu additional practices accepted by successful Scrum teams za vas će danas govoriti Zoran Vujkov, pa bih vas zamolio da ga pozdravite jednim velikim aplauzom.
Dobar dan, želim. Moje ime je Zoran Vujkov i ja sam ovdje da pričam malo o dodatnim praksama koje su primenjene ili adoptirane od strane uspešnih Scrum timova. I should talk in English, by the way, so this is the first mistake. So let's start again. So I'm here to talk about additional practices adopted by successful Scrum teams. So I have a first question for you. How many of you are actually using Scrum Framework in developing software? Raise your hand. Okay, how many of you are successful in using Scrum Framework? Define success. Yeah, okay. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of feedback that I usually get when we talk about this stuff. Okay, so first question, what's your mission in your company? Is your mission to optimize the value, or is your mission to increase output? Which one of these two are your mission when you're talking about your teams, when you're talking about your development? Is it either of these? Is it both of these? Which order? What do you think? You want to increase output, yeah? Of course. But are you starting with increasing output first? Or do you optimize value of what your team doing? This light's killing me, okay? I can only see first few rows, yeah? So I'll focus on you. Okay, so what do we do first? Think about lean principle. Lean principle said, focus on the flow first, and after that increase output, yeah? First to optimize the value which your team do, and after that, try to increase your output, yeah? And the second thing which I usually get when I talk to Scrum teams is I ask them what's their purpose. And very rarely I got very kind of specific answer, or people struggling to explain what's the purpose, yeah? So I found one of the definitions. So our highest priority is to satisfy customer thoroughly and continuous delivery of valuable software. So software which is valuable to our clients, to our customers, yeah? That's our purpose, yeah? So we'll talk about Scrum Framework, yeah? So let's repeat what Scrum is. So Scrum is framework of practices tied together with clearly defined rules, yeah? And creator of Scrum, Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, said there is no extra rules. The all elements of Scrum are important, so if you want to implement Scrum Framework, you need to really take into account all these elements. There is no concept of we have Scrum Framework, but we don't do this or do that or this kind of stuff, yeah? The good thing about Scrum Framework is very simple, lightweight, easy to understand, but sometimes it's difficult to implement. And difficulty comes with for some companies come with this concept of expecting from Scrum Framework to be a silver bullet or cookbook which you can use, and reading that book you will get answer for all your questions, yeah? So once more, you need to implement holistically Scrum Framework to be able to succeed with developing software using a Scrum, yeah? So Ken Schreber said, when rules are not stated, it's expectation from the team to find solution. And you shouldn't go with the perfect solution, because if you're trying to find perfect solution, what usually happens, the problem will change, and you may waste your time. Yeah? So go with something and experiment. Yeah? Jorgen was mentioning this morning, experiment, experiment, experiment. Yeah? Similar things you should do here. Yeah? If your company culture doesn't allow you to experiment, doesn't allow you to make mistakes, doesn't allow you to inspect and adapt, in that case you can't be agile. There is no doubt about that. Yeah? Okay. So lots of people talk about agile, and agile is, very strong label these days. But my opinion, it's not point about agile. It's a point about agility, about finding better way of developing software. That's a point. That's why agile is so popular these days, because we want better way to developing our software. Yeah? That's important. And how do you find these better ways? Obviously, you need to start with something, yeah? And Scrum Framework is a good starting point, by my opinion. You may use other methodologies or frameworks. You can use XP, for example. I'm a big fan of XP. You can use Kanban, for example. You can use these frameworks for scaling, like Scale Agile Framework, if you like. You can use Nexus, you can use Less, you can use DAD, whatever. It's your good starting point. But besides that, you need something extra sometimes, yeah? And how do you find this? With experimenting, yeah? Try to find where you are. Think about where you want to go, experimenting and repeating that all the time. Using inspect and adapt mechanism, Scrum Framework, is crucial, yeah? So, over the time, lots of successful Agile teams, Scrum teams, through the process of self-organization and experimenting, came up with some good additional practices which help them being better in developing software or using Agile frameworks to developing this software. Yeah? These practices, I like to refer to something called GASP, General Accepted Scrum Practices. This is a term created by Scrum Alliance co-founder and one of leading Agile coaches in the Agile world, Mike Cohn. And they're not rules, but they're things we should try and see if that will help you. Yeah? So working with over 100 Scrum teams, I came up with 4. There are many, but I came up with 4, which I think is, by my opinion and my experience, extremely important. Yeah? So there are 4 of them. One of them is called continuous integration. I strongly believe that you can't build in quality and you can't succeed with software development unless you integrate software regularly. So you do continuous integration. Because don't forget, statistics show that about 70% of problems and defects which you find in the software is related to integrations. Yeah? The second thing is something closely specific to Scrum Framework, is related to process called, or procedure called grooming or refinement. And we'll talk about what that actually means. And the third thing is something which comes from extreme programming. It's called user stories. It's a technique for writing requirements which should help you overcome this problem about generally related to requirements. And the fourth thing for me is something called definition ready. So what requirements should satisfy before you start working on that. Yeah? So we'll talk about a little bit more about all these 4. So first, continuous integration. James Shore, quote from Art of Agile, he said that continuous integration is not a tool at all, because lots of people, when they talk about continuous integration, they say, oh, that's a tool. And they talk about Jenkins, Hudson, Bamboo, and this kind of stuff. Yeah? Continuous integration is actually attitude. It's agreement between the people that whenever they check out the code, that code will build and the test will pass. And they agree as well that they will push the code regularly, once, twice a day. That's a kind of vision which we want to have. That's a kind of idea behind continuous integration. There are certain, There are certain practices defined by Martin Fowler who describe what continuous integration is. So he talks about maintaining a code repository, automating a build, make this build fast, being self-testing, people be able to see results from that continuous integration. You can clone, you can test in clone environment of production, and you can automate deployment. So all these practices are very important to be successful in implementing continuous integration. Once more, continuous integration idea behind that is that at any point of time, any day, we have the latest software which runs, and all our tests, which we think is important, passes, which means that they have a quality. Yeah? Obviously, you could have continuous integration without any tests. So the question is, what's your indicator that you have good quality? Yeah? Just because it's building doesn't mean that it's actually of good quality. Yeah? So typical development is that you usually have people in a team working their own branches, and they're pushing a code after a few days or few weeks, and you have these big pushes, which causes typical, very unpleasant experience called merging. Yeah? And you spend lots of time merging with previous code, and you have all sorts of problems there. Yeah? And sometimes people use version source control for the backup rather than using for what's the main purpose. Yeah? And you have ID-driven manual builds. That's a kind of starting point for lots of companies. The first improvement usually comes with having some local machine, and you have scripted build. And that scripted build, I don't know, kicks in let's say, midnight or something like that. So in the morning you have results. Yeah? So this is the next thing is to use some of these continuous integration servers. As I mentioned, some of them, Hudson, Jenkins, Bamboo. And what they usually do, you push the code, and they notice that, and they start kicking a build. Yeah? So you have automated. So you push the code, and they trigger the server, and he kicks the build. Yeah? And that's called continuous build. So you can push the code regularly. You can, as extreme programming guy said, you can push code. Almost every line of code you can push immediately. Yeah? But that's not enough, of course. Yeah? So the next step usually is called something called continuous inspection. So I managed to make a build, and that build was a success. Everything was green. So I had some additional static analysis tools. Yeah? You can use whatever is appropriate for your technology. And that usually gives you some feedback about your quality. And that's called continuous inspection. So the principle is the same. I push the code, the continuous integration server, he builds that, and start static analysis tool and give you results. Yeah? So I said, okay, this is kind of first improvement. The next thing, you want to add some automated test. And usually you start with something called white box test, usually unit test. They're written using XUnit framework, and you can pick whatever is suitable for your technology. This is a very important step, because that's when we start getting some feedback, more feedback about our quality. And what's important here as well, that this test, this build altogether needs to be very fast, yeah, or very quick. So developer will not wait for long to get the feedback from that kind of a settlement. Yeah? So he wants immediate feedback. So he wants to push the code, he wants to build, he wants static analysis done, and he wants a run of unit tests quickly, so he can get feedback, so he can say, okay, this code is good quality, so I'm pushing that on main repository, for example. Yeah? Of course, that's not enough. Unit tests are not enough for us to have some kind of indication of quality. Next step is to add automated tests. And we talk about different kind of tests. We can talk about service level tests. We can talk about automated UI tests. This is very important for two reasons. One, we can relate that to acceptance criteria of our, for example, requirements or user stories, so we can check if they satisfy. And equally is important because we have regression test suite. Yeah? So every time we add some new features, we can run them and make sure that we didn't cause any regressions. The challenge here is that this process can last long. It can last between, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 minutes up to a couple of hours. Yeah? And that's when start getting a little bit more complicated. So depends on the number of tests, depends on how long does it take. You may run this regularly, or you may schedule to be run once a day, twice a day, etc., etc. The key here is, and a key for the continuous integration, that you have something called stop the line. I don't know if you heard that, but this is another lean principle coming from Toyota, which means that when you have broken build, you should stop everything what you do and fix that problem and continue, rather than postponing that fixing and adding more stuff, adding more features, and after that you can't be sure if this is caused by new stuff or old stuff, etc., etc. So Toyota found out that when they stop the line and fix the problem, the cost versus benefit is much goes in that way. They say cost of stopping the line is much less than benefit we get. And the similar thing is in software. In my experience, lots of teams fail here because they can't be bothered with this, or they don't see really purpose in this, or they don't have a strong belief in their test, or the test is very UI oriented, because usually with UI test, sometimes you're fixing more time, you're fixing the test itself rather than you're fixing the code. Yeah? So when we do this, yeah, sure.
Interrupting. We're having some technical difficulties with the microphone, so I would like to ask you to use this one if you don't mind. You can leave that one. We'll just shut it down.
So I'm going to sing now.
Apologize.
I feel like this is reality celebrity now. Yeah. Okay. So after we adding a unit test and after we adding a acceptance test, now there is a question: what next? The key is, it's bloody difficult holding this microphone. I can tell you that. You can add automation of deployment, and trust me, automation is the key. If any of your company wants to have good investment, you should invest in automation of testing, automation of deployment. So when we run this whole cycle, yeah, in the end we want to automate this to some test environment which is clone, hopefully, of your production environment, and do some extra testing, like exploratory testing, for example. Maybe some penetration performance testing, I don't know. Any other kind of testing, yeah? We can look this continuous integration concept from different angle, yeah? So you can have a three phases in this. The first phase consists of a build, inspection, running unit tests, and that usually lasts about 10, 15 minutes. More than that, you will end up with a problem. The developer will not wait. And because they don't want to wait for certain things, they will not run that stuff, yeah? So your unit test needs to be quick. They need to have a good purpose. They need to be, they fastly build, of course, and then they need to run, and they be fast, yeah? So you can quick feedback. The second phase is usually when you add acceptance test, and that takes, as I said, between half an hour, maybe a couple of hours, yeah? And you can run this a few times a day. And you may start automating additional UI tests, and that will take even more time. So you can schedule that running, I don't know, once a week, maybe over the weekend, I don't know. But this is kind of three levels which you can look in the continuous integration. If you look at my cone test pyramid, you could look the proportion between unit test, acceptance test, and GUI test. So what this tells you, that you should have the most unit test, less acceptance test, and a few of GUI tests. Usually what happens in companies, they have this opposite pyramid. They have more GUI tests and the less others, yeah? And if you remember what we were talking about, how quickly you should, first phase, you should have this quick build of code and unit test and running that, and after that acceptance, and the last thing is related to the GUI test. How this looks is one of the examples. So you could have a team working on the team repository. You can push code in some QA repository. You can have some local checks, which is related to team. And can you run all this process? And when you get results from that process, you can push the code to some kind of virtual environment. And in that virtual environment, you can run some additional testing. Yeah? Using Jenkins, that looks like this. Yeah? So you have certain number of builds. You can see in this company has many releases. So they run lots of these continuous integrations, builds, and checking testing in parallel. But you will get results immediately, and you can see where the problems are. So you can stop the line, fix the problem, and move on. And you can create something. Yeah, you can't see here. Can you see anything here? Because everything is green, that's why you can see. If it's red, you will see it. Yeah? So you can create QA dashboard. Yeah? On that dashboard, you can see the status of each of these phases. If everything is okay, everything is green, everything is perfect. Yeah? If something is wrong, you got red alert. Yeah? But with this, you can have each day, any moment, you can have feedback about the latest status of your code. So this really helps your Scrum teams to be able to build in quality. A few years ago, there was 10 years of Agile Manifesto, and two things came up as major challenges. One, Agile Enterprise. So main focus was on the development teams forgetting about the remaining of organization. And the second thing is the team struggling to have potentially shippable product increment at the end of the sprint. That's usually related to the quality issue. Yeah? And this should help you with that. So what we have, so we have early detection of the broken code, broken build. We can identify issues and fix them immediately. We have regression in place. So we have indication of our quality. Yeah? And that's very important. And that's one of the first, these additional practices, but I think it's extremely important to have implemented. And that doesn't cost a lot. It requires some effort, requires some tools, and requires some enthusiasm and belief that quality is important. Yeah? The second practice, which I think is important, is called something product backlog refinement or grooming. And there are some confusions around here in the Scrum community. Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland had added that this is activity within the Scrum framework. So there is no specific event. So it's not event like planning or daily stand-up or review or retrospective. It's just activities which you're expecting from team and product owner to use to work on details of your product backlog items or your requirements. Yeah? And what's usually that consists of reviewing, adding details, splitting requirements in smaller, adding some acceptance criteria, descoping something, discussing some extra details, creating some mock-ups, sketches, anything like that. Maybe doing even some kind of prototyping. And advice from Scrum Framework is that you should use up to 10% of your capacity in the sprint allocating to this. So this is time which development team allocating to product owner to help him making requirements being better. Yeah? So there is a question when to groom. Yeah? You can do this in real time as activity, as recommended by the Scrum Framework. The challenge with that, it requires lots of discipline. Yeah? It doesn't work very well in my own experience. For some teams, yes, but from my experience, for the majority of teams, they struggle with this. The other option is to have a meeting. And in my opinion, that works much better. So you have allocated time for that, and everyone knows when that is, and they can plan their time for that kind of stuff. The challenge here, when do you do this? If you do this too early, and new requirement comes, you're wasting your time. So you should do reasonably closely to the next sprint planning meeting. Yeah? So if you start on Monday, finish on a Friday, usually Wednesday is when the majority of teams are trying to do this grooming activity. Yeah? So there is a question, who does participate in this? Who needs to be there? Obviously, Scrum team, but product owner is mandatory. Not all members of Scrum team needs to attend this. Yeah? It's good, but not mandatory. Yeah? Why is that? Because sometimes in the last few days, people are busy with finishing the requirements, with the forecasting or committing, if you like, what they will do in the sprint. Yeah? The other option is to, on daily stand-up, product owner ask team who is available to attend grooming meeting and who can participate, and they make some kind of agreement. Having a product backlog refinement really does help making requirements better, and really does help increasing productivity of your teams. If you ask Jeff Sutherland, he will tell you it's about doubling velocity. Yeah? I'm not so sure, is it doubling or tripling or whatever. My own experience is that really does help. Yeah? So this is the second additional practice called General Accepted Scrum Practice. The third one is probably one of my favorites, related to one of major challenge which we have on each project, and that challenge is related to our requirements. I think one of the top reasons why companies struggling with delivering successful project is related to requirements. As you know, lots of us have this challenge that requirements are usually defined upfront, and they're very detailed specification which product needs to comply to, and based on this requirement analysis phase and defining that requirement, what we usually do, we create some detailed plan, usually that's created by project management, and after that, development team has very pleasant life following that plan, yeah, and delivering that. And what usually happens if during project life cycle things change, we go to very rigid change control, and that causes lots of dissatisfaction, yeah, which is quite funny because majority of our company has a company value called delight the customer, or customer satisfaction, and this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, lots of companies struggling with the participation of clients or customers, they usually participate with us at the beginning when we have requirement analysis phase, as if you call it, and usually with something called UAT, user acceptance testing. And that's usually very late for us to get any feedback, because if we get feedback at that time, that's late for us to do anything big about that. Yeah? And that's causes something famously called blaming game between business and development. Yeah? So we have this kind of stuff. I'm sure you're familiar with this picture. This picture has many different shapes or forms. Yeah? And if I would like to describe the problem with requirement in one word, I would say that software requirement is communication problem. And there is a problem in communication between the business and technology guys. If either of this side dominates, you will have a problem. If business dominates, you will have a situation that milestones and scope are forced upon development without taking into consideration any feedback from development. Yeah? On the other side, if you have techie guys who are dominant, you have a requirement written and full of technical jargons, yeah, which client doesn't understand. We, as the techie guys, we must speak business language, because business language is much simpler. Yeah. The second thing is who is owner of resource. Yeah, is it business or techie guy? If it's business, we could end up having like few months of a requirement analysis. If techie guys are owner, for resource allocation, you could have a situation that techie guys will sacrifice extra feature for a bit of quality or other way around. Yeah? And the third thing, which is important, regardless of what people saying, we were struggling having a perfect schedule. Yeah? So question is what we do. We make decision based on information which we have, but we do very often. We don't make all decision up front. We spread decision making during the project life cycle. Yeah? And that's when user story comes in. This is a technique for writing agile requirements. I'm a big fan of them, and they come again from extreme programming. Ken Bank created them in 90s, and they represent a few things. User needs, planning item, token for conversations. There are two aspects here, user and there is story. User, who is going to use, how is going to use it. A story tells how this interact with how user interact with the system. And usually you can use a template as a user. I want something from the system, so I have benefit. Yeah? The key here is that focus is on a discussion about requirement, not about writing requirement. And we said that software requirements is a communication problem, so effective communication is the key to resolving this problem. Yeah? According to creators of user stories, the essence of user stories is discussed with the client. Yeah? So Ron Jeffries, which is one of the extreme programming guys, said that each user story has triple C related to that, which is card, can be physical media used for writing requirements, have conversation about that. So we discuss this with business, we discuss this with the clients. We want to get details through to discussion, just in time, with just enough details. Yeah? And the third thing is we should have confirmation. How do we know we are done? How do we know what we implement is right? Yeah? What usually happens here is that obsession with tools causes that we write these requirements in tools like Jira. We have today discussion about TFS, Rally. Yeah? What usually happens when you have requirements in tools? What happens that this doesn't cause any discussion or minimize discussion. And we have minimized discussion between product owner, for example, in the team, development team. This is usually replaced by some detailed written user stories or requirement. The purpose of user stories is not to be very, very detailed and rich. Yeah? And because of that, you have some missing acceptance criteria or missing conditional satisfaction. And do you know what's the biggest waste in the life of software engineer? What do you think? What's the biggest waste of life of software engineer? Yes. The biggest waste is to work on something which you don't understand. Yeah? Because if you give this to developer, he will try, being creative, innovative as it is, try to find solution. And if he doesn't understand the real problem, guess what will happen with solution? Yeah? So if you want to minimize that, you really need to focus on requirement. These requirements really need to have enough details and needs to be very understood by development team. Yeah? As I said, this form, user story, does help us with the understanding, put us in the shoes of user. So I said, as a role, I want activities to have business value. Role is one who is performing that activity, who is getting benefit. Can be a different system. Role does help us with segmentation of our problem. Yeah? So we may think about one type of role, but when we think about some other type of role, we get different requirement. Yeah? Activity is usually related to requirement, what role expect from the system. And business value is very important because we want to understand why we're doing certain thing. Understanding why we're doing certain thing may help us finding a better solution, or may help us coming with some alternatives. Yeah? However, there is a question where are the details, and details are usually in acceptance criteria. And if you write user story on the front of your card, acceptance criteria is usually on the back of your card. Yeah? And they usually translate in tests, but they're not unit or functional tests, because functional tests or unit tests go much deeper in testing different flows through your code. Acceptance criteria are more like conditional satisfaction which you place on your system. Yeah? But it's good to have related tests which verify your acceptance criteria. Yeah? Product backlog is usually a collection of user stories. And if you think about product backlog as an iceberg, so above the water, below the water, below the water you have some big epics, big user stories. Not have details, some good ideas, but with not enough details so the development team can start working on them. Yeah? On the release level, you have much better understood scope. Understanding a scope doesn't mean that I have defined all our requirements to the great details which I need. Yeah? On the level of sprints, I should have requirements on the level of details, which is important for us to can plan what we do and implement that. Yeah? And usually product backlog is prioritized according to the values, risk, knowledge which we gain, and cost, of course. So the backlog is collection of user stories. And user stories are one of the techniques which helps you resolving that or minimizing that issue which we have with a challenge which we have with requirements. Yeah? Okay. The last thing is something called definition of done. This is from Scrum Inc., which is a company from Jeff Sunderland. He changed slightly what was created originally by Bill Wake, another extreme programming guy. It's called something called invest. So you should have all your requirements invest. So you should invest your time to get better requirements. And what that means, you should have requirements which are immediately actionable. So it means that they have no much dependency. You can start working with them immediately. There is no things which hold you down. Yeah? You have N is for negotiable. So I would like to negotiate and discuss this with my product owner. I want details just enough, with just enough details and just in time. Not too early, not too late. Yeah? One way to check this, ask on retrospective your team, did you have your requirements with just enough details and just in time? If you got this requirement early enough or too late. Yeah? The third thing is valuable. Of course, needs to have some value. Why are we doing if we don't have any values? Yeah? E is for estimable. So we want to be able to estimate this. If it can't estimate, that means we have a problem. We don't understand requirements, yeah? S is for size. Size it for the planning or small. Size it appropriately. Small requirements go quicker to the system. If you have big requirements, you usually have something called traveling requirements, which travel from one sprint to another, to another, to another. One of the worst habits for Scrum teams is overcommitting and having these stories which traveling from one sprint to another, yeah? Very difficult to use anything related to velocity, any kind of release planning if you have that kind of situation. And T is for testable. Yeah? So anything what we do needs to be testable. And we want automation, of course. Huh? And this is one of the examples how that may look like. Yeah? So we have this example here. I don't know, user story is defined, approved by product owner, is written using that template, has appropriate feature, has defined acceptance criteria, which include not only positive part, includes some negative scenarios, I don't know, some kind of performance, no data loss, backward compatibility, whatever is needed. Story should be bigger than, let's say, 13 points if you're using story points. Should be estimated by the team who is doing development, and has dependency identified. One of the key thing for the scaling anything in development is related to managing dependencies. If you don't manage dependencies very well, you will struggling. And there is dependency within a product backlog, within a team in terms of skills, and it's inside the software. You may have, I don't know, technical debt. And the last thing is development really should have idea about this, really should understand this requirement. And even that, at the beginning of planning, should have clear idea how should demonstrate what he's going to implement. Yeah. And that's kind of definition already. And that additional practice should help and will help you increasing productivity and velocity of your team. Yeah? Because that will resolve this problem that development will work on something which they do understand, which they can work on, and that will remove that waste which we'll have if we work on something which we don't understand. In the end, I'll say these additional practices are good, but we shouldn't forget basic characteristic of Scrum Framework. And if I want to summarize this basic characteristic, is one of them is self-organizing teams. You should have self-organizing teams. If you don't have that, yeah, you will struggle. The second thing you should have, beside definition already, you should have something called definition of done, which is part of Scrum Framework. Everyone should clearly know when requirement is done, what that means. What exactly is that? The code is built, that the tests are passing and updated, that you update some configurations, you test some kind of enterprise environment, whatever. And the third thing, which is, I think, it's, from my opinion, probably the most important, is to have management who is very agile and lean, who will help you to be great teams, who will help you with the self-organization, who will help you adopting some of these additional practices, who will not stop you and block you and cause you lots of pain if you're trying different things. And my favorite question for the team, Scrum team, is when you finish your retrospective and you identify certain things which you want to improve, do you have a freedom to implement that? Or you depend on someone outside of your team to say, stamping, you can use it. If you have that kind of scenario with someone outside of your team not allowing you to do this kind of stuff, you cannot be agile. Yeah? So think about this. And that's about it from me. So we're talking about these additional practices. I really hope that thinking about them and trying some of them can help you with being better and having more hands raised in terms of successfully using Scrum Framework in developing software. So I shall see you in the afternoon in the session. I think it's about 4 o'clock. We can discuss more about this. Yeah? Thank you.